According to the House Select Committee, subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government, federal officials directed U.S. banks to identify the records of Americans who use certain terms in their financial transactions, including MAGA or Trump. Even more concerning, all right, don't miss this, even more concerning, in fact, it's outrageous. The Department of Justice's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network also flagged Americans who bought religious text, including the Bible. Who authorized such financial surveillance? And why did major U.S. banks comply? And what threats does this pose to American civil liberties? Joining me now to discuss this, Congressman Blaine Luetkemeyer. He serves on the House Financial Services Committee, the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, which should put him in a good position to understand what's going on here, and the House Small Business Committee. He was a former banker before coming into Congress. He represents the 3rd Congressional District of Missouri. Congressman, welcome to Washington Watch.
Thank you, Tony. Good to be with you today.
So, as I mentioned, you have experience in your career before Congress, both in the banking industry and as a bank regulator. Have you seen the industry change to become more accommodating to these types of federal requests, or is this something that's always been happening?
No, during the Obama administration, they instituted something called Operation Choke Point. And what that was is where the regulators would go in and intimidate bankers by saying, if you don't do this, we'll come in and we'll audit you again next week, or we'll until you do this, or we really believe there's some reputational risk by what you're doing here. So they intimidated the banks into cutting off financial services to some folks that the regulators had a personal bias against. They weren't doing something illegal. These entities were not illegal entities. They were good customers of the bank, sometimes with it for 25 plus years. But because of the personal bias that the regulators had, they went in and intimidated banks into cutting off financial services for them. I got in the middle of this when I was, because I'm a former banker and I was on the Financial Service Committee. It came under my subcommittee's jurisdiction, and we stopped it during the Obama administration. And during the Trump administration, they put a kibosh on this full force. However, with the Biden administration, they've come in and done this all over again. And I told individuals whenever we lost, or we won the election last fall, or like in 2020 and 2022, that the Democrats have lost the ability to legislate now because we are the majority in the House. Therefore, instead of doing things by legislation, they're going to do it by regulation, and that's exactly what they're doing. Is they're reinterpreting the law, reinterpreting the rules, and in fact making up new words and new guidance and trying to enforce that all over again to expand their authority. And so when they do this is Choke Point 2.0, a new version of it, but it's still the same thing. They go in and they intimidate banks. Financial Crimes Enforcement Network is FinCEN for short. It's under the jurisdiction of my new subcommittee. And as a result, we pound on them every day practically for all the nonsense that they're doing and all of the invasion of privacy that they are trying to get into. Their job is to ferret out money laundering, illegal activities. That's fine. But there's a way to do that. It's called a search warrant. You go to court and verify that what you're trying to do is worthy of giving somebody's rights being taken from them because there is a good chance that they're doing something illegal. But what the FinCEN is doing right now is just automatically throwing out there with a blanket these words and these actions that they want done, with, I think, without minimal, if any, jurisdiction whatsoever, no authority whatsoever. If I was a banker today, I would tell them, go get a search warrant. I'll be glad to comply with it. In the meantime, no, I'm not going to do it.
So, Congressman Luetkemeyer, let me ask you this. I'm a former police officer, all right? And if I were looking for certain things on somebody driving down the street and I was going to stop them, that would be called profiling. If I were looking, this looks like to me profiling. If you're looking for someone who bought religious text or is related in some way to, MAGA Republicans or Trump, isn't that not profiling?
I think profiling would be one word for it, but I think it's underlying all this is a bias toward conservatives, a bias toward people who disagree with the administration, a bias with anybody who is a supporter of Trump, somebody who they don't have a lot of information on, somebody they think they can intimidate. It's this bias, this totalitarianism aspect, the socialistic aspect of how they operate today.
It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. I mean, isn't this the type of stuff that you would see as you look at communist China and what they're doing over there?
Oh, exactly. I mean, communist China spends $300 billion a year. That's with a B, to surveil, detain, and build new detention camps for their people because they want to control them. They watch every single thing they do. They have a social score that if you don't score high enough, you can't buy a new car, you can't go rent an apartment, you can't change houses, you can't change jobs. This is where they're headed with this nonsense, this overarching control of individuals and businesses. And FinCEN, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, is another wing of their way to control people.
I'm glad you brought up the social credit score that the Chinese use, because you're absolutely right. This is a precursor to that here in the United States. Can we expect the Republicans we're up against a break, but can we expect to see some pushback on this?
Expect that we do every day, but I mean, as I said, FinCEN comes through my committee, and we are meeting with them a lot. And they've got a new director there, and we're going to have her in front of our committee here shortly. And she's going to have a lot to answer for all the things that have been going on. I want to give her feet underneath her, but when she gets to the committee, she better be ready for some answers, because a lot of this nonsense is going to stop.
Right. Well, and ultimately it comes down to elections, because this is, as you said, this is the executive branch doing as they please. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us today. Appreciate you filling us in on this.